these rare occasions where there is an abrupt, radical recognition of our essential nature, the reason, in fact the only reason why it is difficult to integrate this recognition in our everyday experience is for lack of proper guidance. There is absolutely nothing that is incompatible about the recognition of our essential being and leading a fully functional, relational life. If it seems that there is an incompatibility between these two, the recognition of our essential nature and leading a fully integrated life, it is simply because we have not yet explored or had the help in exploring how these two fit together. The recognition of our true nature is so often described in the literature as some marvelous, exotic, extraordinary experience that happens to 1 in a million enlightened people. The recognition of our true nature is simply the recognition of what we refer to when we say, I am. Each of us, all day long, we are making statements about ourselves. I am tired. I am hungry. I am lonely. I am married. I am 34 years old. I am sick, etc., etc., etc. In each of these cases, there is a basic I am that is subsequently qualified by various feelings, activities, states, relationships, etc. All that is necessary is to see the nature of that to which we refer when we say, I am, before it has been qualified or conditioned by experience. There is nothing extraordinary or exotic about that recognition. In fact, even the taste of tea is exotic compared to the knowing of our own being. The knowing of our own being is the simplest, the most obvious, the most intimate experience there is, and no one has privileged access to it. The reason why some people seem to see or know more clearly than others their true nature is that they have not allowed their essential being to be colored and therefore obscured by experience. In other words, when most people feel, I am depressed, the I am part of the experience is obscured by the depression. The depression is what we experience. But some people, even in the midst of an intensely unpleasant experience, such as depression, they emphasize the I am aspect of the experience, not the depressed aspect. Even in a deep depression, even in the experience, I am depressed, the I am that I am shines brightly. It is not even necessary to turn away from the depression, to exchange it for a more positive emotion. All that is necessary is just to discern the I am that is shining, that is present behind the experience, but also shining in the experience. So the more deeply we go into that experience, when I say the more deeply we go into it, I don't mean to suggest that we are one thing And the experience of our essential being is another thing. It's just a limitation of language. The more deeply our being remains with itself, stays in itself, sinks into itself, the more clearly its qualities, if we can call them qualities, they are really the absence of qualities. But the absence of disturbance we call peace. The absence of the sense of lack we call happiness. So if I ascribe positive qualities to our essential being, please understand that what I am really describing is the absence of all the qualities that we usually attach to experience. Our essential being is free of all disturbance, and hence its nature is peace. It is free of the sense of lack, and hence its nature. So that may not seem to be a very direct answer to your question. But what I intend by this answer is to make it very clear to you that your recognition of your essential nature is not an extraordinary experience that happened 14 years ago. It is just a very simple, intimate, ever-present recognition of the essential, uncolored being prior to its coloring or conditioning by thought, feeling, activity, and relationship. And the recognition of that should not make your life any more difficult to lead. On the contrary, it should make your life easier. Your activities are no longer filtered through the neurotic fears and desires of a temporary, finite self. Your relationships are no longer at the mercy of a separate self who is always seeking to fulfill itself through the acquisition of an object, an other, a state of mind. So this simple recognition, our essential being's recognition of itself in us, gradually clears up the way we think and feel, and subsequently the way we act and relate. If the recognition of the self is not an experience, you're right. The recognition of the self, its recognition of itself, is not an experience. It is only possible to experience something that is at an apparent distance from ourselves. For instance, it is only possible for the eyes to see something that is at a distance from them. Likewise, it is only possible to know something as an object that it is at a distance from the knower. Now, there is no distance from ourself to ourself, and therefore ourself cannot know itself as an object of experience. You can know the sound of my voice now, or the sight of this room as an object of experience, because there seems to be one thing called you, the knower, and another thing called me, the speaker, or the room. But you, the knower, can never be an object of your own knowledge, because you are already too close to yourself to be able to know yourself as an object. The sun that illuminates is the sun that is illuminated. There is no distance from the sun to the sun, and therefore it cannot illuminate itself as an object in the same way that it can illuminate the moon. Likewise, our self cannot know itself as an object of experience, because it is too close to itself to be able to separate itself from itself and turn around and say, there is myself as an object. In other words, the self's knowledge of itself. Consciousness's knowledge of itself is the only knowledge there is that does not take place in subject-object relationship. And it is, as such, an utterly unique knowledge that is different from and prior to any other knowledge or experience. In fact, it is the only knowledge that is not relative to the finite mind, and it is thus called absolute knowledge. It is the only absolute knowledge there is. That is the only knowledge there is that is not relative to or dependent upon the finite mind. It is in a different category of knowledge altogether, and it is thus called the absolute, or the absolute truth. Our knowledge of ourself, the knowledge that shines in each of us as the experience I am, is consciousness's knowledge of itself. And I would suggest in religious language is God's knowledge of himself in us. In other words, I would suggest that the simple experience that each of us has, the knowledge I am, before the I am is colored or conditioned by experience, is God's presence shining in each of our hearts. But that presence cannot be known by anything other than itself. Just as the sun illuminates itself, so the self knows itself directly, not through subject-object relationship. As the 13th century Sufi mystic Balayani said, no one sees him except, please don't object to the use of the pronoun he. That was just the literary convention in 13th century Persia. No one sees him except himself. No one reaches him except himself. No one knows him except himself. He knows himself by himself. He reaches himself through himself alone. Only he knows him. On another occasion, Balayani again describing this same understanding that the self is known by itself alone. He said, he sent himself from himself, through himself, to himself. There is no intermediary or means other than him. There is no difference or distance between the sender, that which is sent, and the one to whom it is sent. So you are absolutely right. Our essential being, pure consciousness, cannot be known by the mind as an object of experience. But this does not mean that it doesn't know itself. It knows itself before it knows any other thing. And its knowledge of itself shines in our experience as the simple knowledge, I am.
Greetings. My sense of this discussion is in the distinction, it's language again. And it's a distinction in the word self and I am. My sense is that when we speak of self, we can always speak of self, and that is a reflection of distinction and individuality. But each and every one of us individually can say and recognize that I am. Right? Each of us can recognize and say I am. And when we say I am, we're all the same. It's I am. But when we say self, suddenly there's an interactive process and with others, and there's a sense of interplay between observers.
Okay, if you don't like my use of the word self, that's fine. If the word has too many associations for you, if the word self in your experience is identical with your individuality, your personality, your body, your mind, then just substitute my use of the word self for a different word. But let's not get hung up over terminology. When I speak of the self in this context, I speak of the self that each of us knows ourselves to be, the self that we knew ourselves to be when we were 5 years old, and 10 years old, and 20 years old, and every moment the self that is present at the heart of our experience. Not the thinking self, the feeling self, but the essential self that we are. That's what I refer to. But if you don't like the word, or it has too many associations for you, that's fine. Just substitute a different word for it.
And that's fine, I understand that. It's just that it was my sense, it's not that I like one word. Well, it's that my sense of the discussion points more to the I am.
Yes. But the word I am, depending on the context in which I use it, I may sometimes refer to it as a self or the self. I may sometimes refer to it as our essential self-aware being. I may sometimes refer to it as God's presence in the heart. I may sometimes refer to it a little more clinically as consciousness, depending on the context of the conversation. And one of the reasons that I use many different words for this unnameable reality is that many of us have difficulties due to our previous associations with certain words. You don't particularly like the word self because of its association, and that's fine. Some Buddhists, for instance, I'm sure there are Buddhists here, some Buddhists don't like the word I or self for obvious reasons. They prefer the word awareness. Some Catholics don't like the word God because of its previous associations, but the Sufis and the mystical Christians amongst us love the word God. So it's another reason for referring to this unnameable reality in many names, so that each of us can relate in our experience to what is being said. So we should just make the necessary translation if we find that I'm using a word that contradicts their previous association.
Hi, I have seen only just 20 or 30 seconds of your video once. But I'm always very much interested in talking to you. My name is Atul Mehra, and I'm author of the book, The Unseen Wisdom of the Unborn. And I've been working with unconscious for the last 18 years with the work of Dr. Werner Meinhold in Germany. And we have worked a lot, which is on self. I have a little different, with due respect, little different point of view regarding two questions which were asked about the disease. So Mr. Eckhart said, if God is perfect, then he is incomplete without me.
If God is perfect,
then he is incomplete without me. God cannot ignore me, he has to include me so that he can be perfect. So at the same thing, what I'm trying to say, the self is very important. So for me, if opposite doesn't exist, self cannot be recognized.
If
opposite is very important. If opposite doesn't exist, self cannot be recognized.
Yes. Sorry, go on.
Disease is opposite to me, because Meinhold says symptom is something logical. This is the wisdom of the body to find the correct symptom, because the soul of disease is same as the soul of health. The disease is an unconscious expression of self. That is the part which is looking for its recognition. So that's why my body expresses it, because the word expression comes from the Latin word ex means out and pressure. pressure out so that I can recognize myself. So our task is to make visible which has been invisible in the history of my life. Because cancer is not a way to die. For me, cancer is the last hope to survive. I have worked with cancer patients. I have a client, her tumor disintegrated. Mindhold talks about, in one session, the terminal cancer, stomach cancer, went out into the toilet that night. So we have that capacity to
Can
access.
you try to formulate your question clearly?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say, that when you were talking about that disease thing, the disease is very important.
Disease?
Yeah. Like you were talking about the cancer, you were talking about the other thing. Disease is very important for me.
Did I talk about disease?
Like the cancer, you said, yeah, he mentioned the two questions which were asked before, so I'm referring to them.
Okay.
So for me, the self cannot be recognized until there is something opposite.
Okay. Let's take that as the essence of your question. The self cannot be recognized.
May I add one last thing?
Sure.
So what we also discovered, it is easy and safe to create a cancer than confronting basic essential fears which are connected with my essence when we talk about mother's womb and early childhood conditioning. Thank you.
Your very first statement was something like, God is not complete without me. Is that right? If God needed something other than itself to be complete, then God would not be God.
He has to include me.
No, I'm afraid God knows nothing about you.
I don't agree with it.
No, but presumably you asked the question because you're interested in my answer. So what I'm saying is that there is no room for otherness in God. If something other than God were present in God, then not only would that other than God be limited, but the limitation of that otherness would make God limited. It would make God something finite, and then God would not be God. Your existence is God's existence. The I am in you is God's knowledge of himself shining in your finite mind. But even your finite mind is not a separate, independently existing object. It is the activity of consciousness. There are no objects or selves or things or people or worlds or anything in infinite consciousness or in God's infinite self-aware being. The infinite can only know the infinite. The finite can only be known by the finite. If infinite consciousness, or in religious language, God's infinite being, wants to know something that seems to be other than itself or himself, consciousness has to, as it were, fall asleep to itself. It has to contract into a finite mind. And it is only through the agency of that apparently finite mind that consciousness knows itself as the world. But our finite minds are not objects in consciousness. They are the activities of consciousness. So no actual mind or self or object or world ever comes into existence. When you have a dream at night, your own mind imagines a world within itself, but it cannot know that world directly. Your mind has to fall asleep to itself and enter into its own imagination as a separate subject of experience from whose point of view the dreamed world may be known. But what is that separate subject of experience? It is not a separate mind. It is simply the activity of your dreaming mind. When you wake up in the morning, you realize that the world made out of matter and the separate subject of experience made out of mind that seemed to be so real from the point of view of the dreamed subject were in fact simply activities of your own unlimited, intimate, indivisible mind. So be open to the possibility that each of our minds are dreams in the mind of God's infinite being, in the mind of infinite consciousness. And that each of our minds are not the entities, but are rather the agencies, the activities through which God appears to itself as the world.
What I was trying to say through that system
Can you use the mic so we can hear?
That God isn't complete without me if he wants to be perfect. So system cannot recognize himself by itself.
No, I've understood that, and I've responded to that. God's perfection doesn't require the knowledge of you.
Absolutely, but since I'm also part of God, so
you are not a part of God. There are no parts in God.
I'm talking in the sense that I belong to him.
Okay.
Or I am God.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm part of God. I automatically become God.
Okay.
So from that point of view, I was talking. So I was telling the same thing that for me also, I have been working because we have in India that which is Maya. So we don't know what exactly the truth is. So that is why we need to take that time and space as a reference to understand where I am right now, and through that we live kind of experiences. And of course we know that conscious is much more beyond than mind.
At a relative level, of course, we need to know about time and space in order to know where the body is located. But in order to know ourselves, we don't make any reference to time or space or objects or thoughts or relationships. In order to know ourselves, we must refer to ourselves. And the self that refers, the one who would refer to ourself, is already ourself. He knows himself by himself.
I agree.
So
I agree with it, and like I also tell that for me Jesus never said I am who I am. For me he said I am who am I, because like with I am there's lots of options. I am this. But
that's true. Moses made this comment in the Old Testament, I am that I am, and Ramana Maharshi made the same comment, even more economically. He just said, I, meaning I am only what I am.
Yeah.
But I think that the cartoon character Popeye said it even more accurately than either Jesus, Moses, or Ramana Maharshi. He said, I am what I am, and that's all that I am. I am simply what I am prior to its conditioning, and therefore its limiting by any of the qualities of experience.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the beautiful things, please allow me to share with you, in the symbol of cross, the horizontal part of cross represents when man used to walk like an animal on 4 legs. And the vertical part of cross is symbol of self, because standing straight and walking straight is a symbol of I. That's why the letter I in English is a straight line. And Y in Spanish means yo, has the same significance, but he has lifted 2 hands towards the heaven. And I and Y in Sheldon numerology has same numerical value, which is 1, which is the start, the beginning, or God, or the initiations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
I wonder if you might be able to define duality and non-duality, and and just discern between the two, and it's just helpful for me to compare and contrast.
Sure, okay. Duality could be defined as the belief that there are two fundamental realities, one named matter and the other named mind. Non-duality is the understanding that there is a single reality. Now, what we call that reality doesn't matter. The important thing that there is a single reality, and that single reality must be complete within itself. It must be whole, indivisible, and therefore ultimately unnameable. And in fact, everyone has the intuition that there is a single reality. It's not important that religious people call that reality God. Scientific people call that reality matter. Mystics call that reality I or presence. It doesn't matter what name we give to it. But all these different disciplines, they're all founded upon this deep intuition. Conventional science is founded on this intuition. There is a single reality. Artists and scientists tend to go outwards towards objective experience in order to explore and discover that reality. Mystics tend to go inwards in order to explore and discover that reality. And it seems to begin with that both these two groups of people set out in opposite directions. But in fact, they simply set out in opposite directions around the same circle. And if both parties go far enough in their experience and don't stop short, they eventually come to the same recognition. What they call that recognition is not important. It is ultimately unnameable because names can only be referred to entities that have limits. And this single reality, having nothing in itself other than itself, must be without limits.
Would you say that there's no such thing as an awakening or an enlightenment experience, because an experience is something that happens in time and
Yes.
space that can be remembered?
Yes. It's true that there is no such thing as an enlightenment experience. However, it is quite legitimate to speak of an awakening experience. Let me give you an analogy. Let's imagine that you're watching a movie and you are completely absorbed in the drama. So absorbed that you forget that you are watching the movie and your whole being is involved. Your emotions go up and down with the characters and the drama, etc. And at some point there is a break in the movie. There's a commercial break. The movie comes to an end. And at that moment, you come out of your trance and you see the screen. And you realize, oh, I was lost in the movie. It wasn't really a murder plot. I was just seeing the screen. Now, when you recognize the screen, you don't suddenly start seeing the screen. You were seeing the screen all along. In other words, seeing the screen is not a new experience. It seems to be a new experience only because you were previously lost in the movie. So from the point of view of one who is lost in the movie, it is legitimate to say, I suddenly saw the screen. I suddenly had an awakening experience. It happened at 3 p.m. on the 24th of June, 1987. No, in fact, we were always seeing the screen. Awareness is always aware of itself. But its awareness of itself is colored, in most cases, by its awareness of objective experience. And as a result, awareness seems to lose itself in the movie of experience and seems to wake up from that trance and recognize itself. But when it recognizes itself, it realizes, actually, I was knowing myself all along. In other words, the recognition I am awareness is not an experience that takes place in the movie, in experience. Awakening is not an experience. It is not something that takes place in the drama. It is the ever-present background of the drama and is later discovered to pervade the drama and finally to be the sole reality of the drama.
It seems like there's a common trap to get caught in relating to this memory of recognizing the screen, because then it's basically denying that the screen is present at the time we're remembering it as a past
I'm sorry,
experience.
can you say that again?
It seems that a common trap would be to think that there was this recognition of the screen at some form or time, and then it's not happening now, is kind of like denying the reality of the recognition.
Yes, but for one who is lost in the drama of experience, it is legitimate to say, turn your attention away from the objects of experience and allow your attention to return to that with which all experience is known, or that within which all experience appears. Now, that suggestion seems to imply that there is some, that we can cease attending to the objects of experience and start attending to the subject of experience instead. But we cannot, the subject cannot attend to itself because it is already standing at itself. Attention from attendere means to stretch yourself towards something. Attention is the stretching or the shining of awareness towards an object. But awareness is the one thing that awareness cannot attend to, because it is already standing at itself, just as the sun is the one object that the sun cannot shine on. So when we talk about giving attention to awareness, it is a very inaccurate phrase and is just a concession to our previous habit of giving attention to objects. In fact, awareness's knowledge of itself is brought about by a relaxation of the attention, a sinking of the attention into the source from which it rises. We can never direct our attention towards its source, just like you cannot shine the beam of a torch, of a flashlight, onto the light bulb from which the light emanates. You can shine your flashlight on everything else apart from the light bulb. We can give our attention to awareness can give its attention, can shine the light of its knowing on everything apart from itself. If it wants to know itself, it must relax the focus of its attention and sink, allow attention to sink deeper and deeper and deeper into that from which it rises. And that is the essence of prayer or meditation.
It seems that the whole idea of integration of a particular recognition into one's life is already a little bit off.
From an absolute point of view, yes, but it's a very legitimate question. How do we, because what I've just described is the inward-facing path, the return of attention to its source, but I do not mean to imply that one should be attending to the source of attention 24/7. No, it is legitimate and necessary that we turn outwards again towards our thoughts and feelings, our activities and relationships. And it's a very legitimate question. How do we lead our lives in line with this new recognition?
Could we say that integration is simply recognizing again and again and again that everything is the nature of awareness?
It's not just recognizing that, it is thinking, feeling, acting, perceiving, and relating in a way that is consistent with that recognition. So it is not enough simply to recognize our true nature. That is the first step. It's a big step. But we then have to turn away, attention has to turn away from its source and turn outwards again, particularly towards our activities and relationships, and to try to align our activities, to align first of all our thoughts and feelings, and subsequently our activities and relationships with this new recognition. And this is what somebody once asked Saint Augustine about this. Basically, how should one live in the world? What does this understanding look like in everyday life? And he simply replied, love and do whatever you want. But by which he meant, love, recognize first your shared being with everyone and everything. Not just know, but feel that the being, the isness, the being of everyone and the isness of everything is identical to the amness of yourself. Once we not only know that, but feel that, it's just a matter of living the implications of that recognition to the best of our ability. And there is no end, I would suggest, there is no end to the colonization of our thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships in this understanding, with this understanding. Kabir had a question.
Thank you. I'm going to embarrass myself by the way I asked this question, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm trying to know if the feeling I get when I say I am is the I am that I am.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I want to know, is that it? So that's it.
Okay. Well, have you not always been yourself?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So what you refer to as I am or myself must be that element of your experience that remains with you at all times, in all states, and under all circumstances. What is that? Have any of your thoughts always been with you?
No.
What about your feelings and emotions?
No.
Sensations, perceptions, activities,
No.
relationships?
No.
So when you say, I have always been myself, there is this continuity of myself that runs throughout experience. That continuity cannot be derived from thoughts, sensations, perceptions, activities, or relationships. So what are you referring to when you say, I have always been myself?
It's the thing that's left when all those things are gone.
Tell us more about that.
It's the thing that's consistent. It's the unnameable. It's the thing I can't point to. I can't see. I can't describe. It's the only thing that's been there, consistent. Whenever I've said I am, when I say it again, I am. It's the same.
Does it have an age?
No.
Does it have a gender?
No.
Does it have a nationality?
No.
Does it have a relationship status?
No.
Is it ever diminished by experience?
No.
Is it ever aggrandized by experience?
No.
What more are you looking for?
Okay, thank you.
Kabir behind you.
Assuming that a person reaches a state where the I am is more or less a stable experience, state of being. What is the purpose of experience? Is the I am enriched by experience? In a way, you've partly answered it already when you quoted Augustine and said, love and do as you will. I'm asking a question about what is the purpose? Do we recognize a purpose in experience? And is there anything to aspire to from the foundation of I am? We know of lives lived in extraordinary ways. And we know of lives lived in modest, more modest ways. So is the I am enriched by experience? And does this ever-present I am add something to the human adventure and aspiration? You see where I'm going with this?
Yes, yes. Well, if I respond to the first part of your question first, is the I am ever enriched, or by implication diminished by experience? So imagine you were a 5-year-old boy and you are playing in your garden, and you say, I am aware of the trees, I am aware of my parents, I am aware of the feeling of hunger, I am cold, or whatever. But if you had, at that time in your life, withdrawn your attention from all the qualities that defined what you essentially are, the seeing the trees, being cold, being hungry, being tired, and just given your attention to the experience I am, before it was qualified by experience. And you took a sample as a 5-year-old boy of that simple experience I am. Imagine you could package it, you put it in an envelope, you put it in your drawer. And now, in this moment, you take another sample of the experience I am. And then you take the 5-year-old sample, the example of the 5-year-old boy, out of storage, and you compare the two experiences of I am. Innumerable experiences have passed between these two samples. But has the experience I am changed or been aggrandized or diminished in any way in the intervening years?
Perhaps not, but can we recognize that there are beings whose I am is immense? As it's said in a tradition, Abraham was not a single man, he was a nation.
He was?
A nation.
Yes.
So there are differences in being localized in individuals.
I would say, and this may be a difference in our traditions and in the way we're using language, but I would say there weren't different I ams, there weren't different, I would say there is a single I am, there is a single being. There are not numerous beings. There is a single, infinite, self-aware being, referred to as God in the religious traditions, referred to as consciousness, referred to in common parlance as I. Now, the difference between Abraham's experience and most people's experience is that the I am, the self that each of us feels ourselves to be, is mixed with, and therefore apparently limited by, experience. So the I am, what I am, for most people, seems to be very small. It just seems to refer to this little corner of experience called my thoughts, my sensations. So for most people, the experience I am is limited to a single body. Now, I would suggest that this image, when you said Abraham was not a person, he was a nation, is a poetic and a beautiful way of suggesting that the experience of I am that shone in Abraham's mind had been relieved of the limitations that most people superimpose on their own being. So Abraham experienced the fullness of being in himself, represented here as being a nation rather than a person, an ocean rather than a lake. But that the I am that Abraham felt as himself, and the I am that most people feel as themselves, is the same I am, relieved of its limitations in Abraham's case, and still apparently limited in most people's case, but nevertheless the same I am, shining in and as the essence of each of ourselves.
So the experience of I am can grow. Let's say that 5-year-old had a pure experience of I am, and another person who has lived like a Martin Luther King, let's say he had the same experience of I am. There seems to be a difference, impossible difference in scale.
Yes,
in
okay.
I am.
Again, I think this is to do with our two different ways of formulating this, but I would say that the I am doesn't grow. It is always the same size, and in fact it has no size, it is infinite. But the I am can be relieved of apparent limitations. When before this building was put up, the space that is contained within it was the same single space that is the space of the universe. When this building was put up, that space seemed to be limited by the 4 walls of this room. The space in this room seemed to acquire the limitations of the walls of this room. In other words, it seemed to become temporary and small and located. But if we were to take a sample of the space in this room and a sample of the space out in the world, they would have the same qualities. And when this building is one day taken down, the space in this room won't suddenly expand or unite with the space in the universe. It was never separate from it. It never had its own identity. So whilst it is true that this space seems temporarily to be limited, and when this building is taken down, it will be relieved of those limitations. We cannot say that the space in this room will grow or expand or unite with the greater space. So in most people's case, their own being is something small, something finite, something limited. The first endeavor, to go back to your original questions, I would say there were 2 aspirations. And the first aspiration is to see our being as it is, prior to its apparent limitation by experience. That, I would say, was the first and the highest endeavor that a human mind can engage in, to recognize its essence as it is. And then the second endeavor, going back to our previous conversation, would be to lead a life that is consistent with that recognition of what we essentially are.
What kind of life would that be?
It would be a life when I was in boarding school in England, from the ages of 8 to 13, we used to go to chapel every night, every Sunday night. Chapel every day, but chapel every Sunday night. And there was a particular hymn that we sang every night, every Sunday night for 5 years. And the words went something like this: God be in my eyes and in my seeing. God be in my ears and in my hearing. God be in my nose and in my smelling. God be in my mouth and in my speaking. God be in my heart and in my understanding. It would be that kind of life.
Thank you.
And then behind you after that.
I have a practical question. How do you interact with, deal with, an I amness that is deeply obscured?
The most important thing in our interaction with another in whom their essential being is obscured is to first see and know, before we know anything about that person with all their limitations and its expressions, to know that they are essentially this infinite, open, loving presence of awareness. In other words, to know that in their essence they are God's infinite self-aware being. However obscured that might be in their experience, and however that obscuration may now be expressing itself in that person's thoughts and feelings and their subsequent activities and relationships, to know that first about them. Before you know anything else about them, know that about them and feel that about them. And then attend to the more relative expressions of thought, feeling that you are facing. And that may mean that you don't just smile sweetly at them and say, I recognize that you are this essential, innocent presence. It may require a very firm no. You may see very clearly that their thoughts and feelings, their subsequent activities and relationships are not in line with their true nature. They don't yet know that, and they are suffering as a result and expressing their suffering in aggressive ways. So they don't yet know that, but that's not their fault. So you first feel that their being is your being, and then you respond relatively and appropriately to whatever behavior is facing you. And you would be amazed at the transformative power of simply recognizing the innocence of this presence at the heart of everyone. You don't have to express it. It's not appropriate in the circumstances that you are referring to express this understanding. It's only necessary to feel it. And that feeling will communicate itself somehow, pre-verbally, and it will have its impact. That is your real response. Whatever you say or don't say to that person, your real response to them is to know them as they truly are, and to allow that knowledge to inform the way you respond to them.
Hi, everyone. I'm nervous, which I think is appropriate, because I wanted to ask about fear a little bit. Because as I sit here and I take in everything that's arising, it feels like to recognize I am is the simplest, easiest, most natural thing in the world. And then I wonder about fear, because in my mind I have this association that there's been moments where some recognition has crept in and then was followed by fear or contraction. And I wonder if that's even right at all, if it's just an association in my mind. And I think about teachers describing fear with awakening, and I just wondered if you could share on that.
So you say that the recognition I am is the simplest, most obvious, easy recognition. So presumably you are having that recognition now. Is there any fear? Is fear inherent in that knowledge I am?
It seems not.
Okay. So if it's not, on whose behalf are you speaking when you say, I am afraid? You're obviously not speaking on behalf of the self that you are. So on behalf of which self are you speaking?
Well, rationally I would say, the ego or something.
No, but not rationally, because when you feel fear and you look for the self that is afraid, you've already said that the recognition of this inherently peaceful being that shines in your mind as the knowledge I am is easy, obvious, and intimate. So in the midst of your fear, it's very easy for you to go to the experience I am. In other words, the experience of the inherently fear-free being that you are. So on whose behalf is the fear arising? Who is the I that is afraid?
I think for me, what's coming is the relational I. I don't really know.
Well, that's good. You don't really know.
Yeah.
Try to know that one. Try to find the I that says, I am afraid. Right now. You may not be afraid now, but you said you were a little nervous. Try to find some feeling of awkwardness, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, it's right here. Yeah.
Okay, now, when you say, I am, let's say awkwardness. Can we call it awkwardness?
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on the awkwardness, tell us about the I that says, I am awkward. Tell us about the awkward self.
It's interesting because I can only find ways to describe it in terms of sensations or thoughts.
But yourself is obviously not a sensation or a thought, so try to refine your research into yourself. Tell us about the I that is awkward. What do you find when you look for it?
I can't find it.
And what happens to the feeling of awkwardness or fear when the self on whose behalf it rises is found to be non-existent?
Yeah, it relaxes.
That's the way to go.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to, I'm not really sure where this is going, but I'd like to open up the topic of the human side. This has to do with a teacher I just broke up the relationship with. It was like a abusive kind of spirituality in which you use the name of truth, like violently, just to avoid the humanness. And so I'm not really sure what the question is, but for me it just feels like you have to go through all these emotions and sensations to actually very kindly, very, very tenderly come back to your heart and just find the awareness beneath all the chaos. Because, right now everything's a mess. Everything's falling apart. So, and since I broke the relationship with this teacher, I've started to feel so much more alive, because all of these hidden emotions and all of this repressed fear and anger are coming up, and it's just life. It's just aliveness that wants to express and needs to come out. So, I don't really know what the question is, but do you think that's accurate? Just like, no one can tell you anything about yourself. No one can tell you anything because no one really knows, and that's the freedom right there. That's
yes. The self is only known by itself. And therefore, only yourself can tell you anything about itself. Other people can ask you questions, such as in our previous conversations, is the feeling of awkwardness, the feeling of fear, the experience of depression, are these feelings inherent in myself? But it is for you to answer that question. And in order to answer that question, you have to go to yourself. You have to find out, is fear inherent in what I am? Yes, fear visits me from time to time. That's another matter. But is it essential to me? Does it define me? Does it limit me? Does any experience limit me? It is for you to know. Another person might say, as indeed I sometimes do, your essential self is without limits. But this is not said, it is not said with the intention of your believing that. It is said simply to confront our old beliefs and feelings that what I am is temporary and finite. But in some ways it is more efficient not to say what our self is, to simply ask the question. If you go to the experience that shines in your mind as the knowledge I am, what do you find there? Does it have an age? Does it have a gender? Does it have a location? Does it have a... And in order to answer each of these questions, you have to go a little bit more deeply into that you call I. You have to taste yourself more deeply, more intimately. So you come to your own knowledge. Yourself comes to a knowledge of itself. In fact, the self is always knowing itself, but its knowledge of itself is mixed with its knowledge of experience, and thus it seems not to know itself clearly. So these questions are like bread, it's like a breadcrumb, it's like Ariadne's golden thread that leads the self, apparently, more and more deeply into itself, until it can't go any further, until it tastes its essential, irreducible essence. But nobody can, only the self can know itself.
I feel there's also like an embracing of the body, because that would feel more intellectual for me, like just on the I am, and just, it would be much more mind-made. And because when I do that, I kind of forget about the body.
Well, I recommend that while you are exploring who you essentially are, you do indeed forget about your body, and you forget about your mind, and you forget about your activities, your relationships, because this is not, at least this stage of the investigation, is not an investigation into your body, your mind, your activities, or your relationships. It's an investigation into you.
But wouldn't that be as a split off? Like I'm separating myself from the body?
separate yourself from the body to begin with. Your body is not essential to you.
But
You come back, and this is not a nihilistic approach. I'm not suggesting that we won't come back to our thoughts, our sensations, our perceptions, our activities, our relationships. But you have to see first clearly who you are. You have to see that what you essentially are is independent of experience. That includes the independence from your body, because as long as you feel this identity with your body, you will feel, no matter how, no matter, and you have come across this in your previous relationships, no matter in your previous relationship, no matter how smart one's mind might be, if you feel that what I essentially am is identical to my body, two essential emotions will govern your life: the fear of disappearance and the sense of lack. Because you will feel, this body, am going to disappear. I was born and I will die. So the existential fear of disappearance will be dictating what you think and feel and how you subsequently act and relate from behind the scenes. And if you feel that what you essentially are is identical to your body, you will feel that you are a fragment. And this fragment will always be seeking to complete itself through the acquisition of objects, substances, relationships, states of mind, and substances. So yes, to begin with, ignore everything that is not essentially yourself. When you have recognized what you essentially are, then come back and incorporate your experience of your body, your activities, your relationships, in a way that is consistent with your understanding. And this will prevent you from ever having to, this will prevent the ego, the separate self, ever appropriating this teaching, this understanding, in order to perpetuate its temporary, finite existence, which you know very
feel
well.
like I've been through there, and now it's time to integrate the
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
somehow. Yeah, because it's normal, you know, like we're spiritual beings, but we're still,
Okay.
it's obvious. It's
Is there
the most
anything to
simple.
your experience of your body other than the knowing of it?
Can you repeat that?
Is there anything to your experience of the body other than the knowing of it?
Sensations.
Is there anything to a sensation other than the knowing of it?
There's emotions too. Emotions, like with the
Emotion.
sensation.
Is there anything to an emotion other than the knowing of it?
There could be like stories.
Is there anything to a story other than the knowing of it?
Yeah, well,
Look around your experience now. Both your internal experience, your thoughts, your feelings, emotions, sensations, and your external experience, the world, which you experience in the form of sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells. Is there anything to your experience, inner or outer, other than the knowing of it?
no.
Is anybody here currently experiencing anything other than the knowing of their experience? Has anyone here ever experienced anything other than the knowing of experience? And imagine if we were to ask this question, not just to those of us interested in non-duality, but imagine asking this question to all 7 billion of us. Let's include the animals, 7 trillion. Have any of you ever known? Could any of you ever know, or do any of you know anything other than the knowing of experience? In other words, is anything other than knowing ever truly known? Has anyone ever found anything other than knowing in experience? How do we know there is something other than knowing? We don't. Matter, the stuff out of which you believe your body is made, is the stuff that our contemporary culture tells us exists outside of knowing, outside of consciousness. We've been looking for this stuff for 2,500 years. We still haven't found it. We're not going to. It's not there. So don't try to bring this understanding into your body. Try to bring your body into this understanding. Feel your body in a way that is consistent with this understanding. Don't limit this understanding to your body. Your body is an ocean of sensations and perceptions. Free-floating, borderless, limitless, free in this expanse of awareness. If I were to ask you now, where does the sensation? Close your eyes. Don't refer to your memory. You're a newborn child, you've only just been newborn infant, you've just been born. You have no memory to refer to. Tell us about your experience of your body without reference to memory. In other words, referring only to your direct experience of your body.
As a newborn?
Sorry? Keep your eyes closed. Tell us about your current, direct, intimate experience of your body without reference to memory.
I feel a tingling in my feet.
What do you know of feet without reference to memory?
There's a weight on my feet.
What do you know of, why do you think that this tingling is something called weight without reference to memory?
I mean, there's a pressure, there's obviously something.
There's obviously something, perfect. Tell us about that something. Not philosophically, in your experience.
Yes.
What are you experiencing? Do you see each question I ask you, you remove another layer of concepts, beliefs, memories. Tell us about the raw experience.
It feels energy.
Energy. Tell us about it.
It moves around and...
It is what did you say?
Moving around.
Moving. It's amorphous. Can you find an edge to it?
It finishes on my...
Sorry?
It finishes on... It doesn't go beyond my skin.
What knowledge of skin do you have with your eyes closed and without reference to memory?
Something that just covers me.
Something that...
Covers me.
You're referring to concepts, you're not referring to your experience. Do you see how profoundly your concepts have conditioned your experience with the body, that even when we do this experience, you talk of skin and feet, although you have no current direct experience of something called skin?
Like if you ask, I would answer, but I really don't need to name it.
Well, you do need to name it for this reason. Because you are already naming the body. You are already saying, I am limited by my skin. You are already naming, so I'm asking you these questions in order to refine and refine and refine and refine. I'm trying to push you gently, more deeply into the experience of your body, because I'm trying to respond to your question about incorporating this understanding in your body. I'm trying to show you that your body, what you call your body, is not your body. That if you shut your eyes and you go innocently, with the innocence of a newborn infant that knows nothing, that knows its experience, but doesn't know what its experience is, and you just speak of that, the raw experience itself, you will find that your body is a flow of sensing and perceiving. That it has no shape, it has no size, it has no age, it has no gender, it has no location, it has no nationality, it has no age. That is the true experience of your body. What you think is the true experience of your body is just layer upon layer, upon layer, upon layer of concepts that you have inherited from your culture.
I mean, I also, I'm sorry, but I also feel that the body is always present. Like you can always come back to the body.
No, the body is not always present in your experience. The body is experienced as a flow of sensations and perceptions, and no perception or sensation is always present. You have an intuition, I am always present. You're correct. But because of your association of what I am with the body, you think the body is always present. So there is truth in your intuition, I am always present. But you have mixed up what you are with the body, so you think it is the body that is always present. It is not the body that is always present, it is you that is always present.
It is me, including the body. I'm so sorry, I just don't want to leave it out. It just doesn't feel right. It's as if it could hold it, you know? It just
everything that is present in your experience borrows its apparent existence from the only one that truly exists. When you feel my body is absolutely real, you're right. When you feel the world is real, you are absolutely right. There is no such thing as an unreal experience. Your experience of the body is absolutely real. Your experience of the world is real, but the question is, what is its reality? And in order to find out what is the reality of your experience, you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And if you do that, what you will find, I'm not going to name what you will find. Thank you very much.